The board of the Ludwig Holberg Memorial Prize is very proud to be able to include Natalie Zemon in the Circle of Holberg Prize laureates. And it's a great pleasure and honor for me to ask Minister Tore Osland and this year's Holberg Prize laureate, Natalie Zemon to join me on the podium, for Natalie Zemon will receive this year's Holberg Prize and the Holberg Medal.
Minister, Ludwig Holberg Memorial Fund, the Holberg Prize Academic Committee, dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, I am deeply moved by the great honor you bestow upon me today. It is a high point in my entire life of scholarship. With me here in spirit are the ghosts of the men and women whose lives I have retold. From French printers to Caribbean slaves, from Jewish merchant women to Muslim travelers. With me here in memory are the scholars from whom I've learned so much over the years. Indeed, looking around the chamber, some of them are present in person here. I am one among many who have sought to widen the subject matter of history, and while still using the venerable tools of our craft, have tried to find new ways of interpreting historical evidence. And with me today, too, is the delight of coming to know the books and adventures of Ludwig Holberg. Even in an 18th century full of polymaths, Holberg's range in genres and talents is astonishing. And his was a life lived in a comic mode with which I feel some kinship. My disposition, he wrote in his memoirs, generally leads me to combine truth with pleasantry, and if I can, to make a joke the vehicle of instruction. Some speak the truth. In a passion, and others with a smile. Not for Holberg, the futile disputations of the academic logicians, but rather the active satire and even coarse humor, as he said, of his comedies, and the daring wit and social vision of the journey of Niels Klim to the world underground. Nor did he spare himself, as we can see in the ironic self-mockery in his memoirs. As for his many history books, he did not exactly write history with a smile, but the comic mode is present, expressed there in his desire to write history that was, quote, trite, not trite and hackneyed, but novel and interesting. What made it new, in his view, was not only his fresh research, but also his non-partisan tone. He livened up his best-selling general church history by what he called perfect impartiality. Fathers of the church were sometimes blamed, and heretics sometimes praised, quote, whatever they deserved. In his memoirs, he compared the literary culture and manners of different European lands without taking one realm or language as the model by which all others must be judged. The nonpartisan tone is even found in his Jewish history, which was totally free from the usual indignation at the stubborn refusal of the Jews to convert to Christianity. Good theater man that he was, Holberg included a chapter on the Jewish comic theater during the festival of Purim, with a sample scene from a comedy translated from Yiddish into German. Women, too, were among Holberg's favorite subjects. Comic figures in his plays, his serving women often speaking the best sense, worthy figures in his book of heroines with its strong women rulers, not to mention the range in gender roles that Niels Klim met in Poitou, Cockaclou, and other provinces underground. And then there is that delicious moment in his memoirs when, having been accused of flattering women, Holberg responds that no, he was not flattering women, but just speaking as an impartial judge. Women have great versatility of talent, he affirmed, and are deficient in none of the qualifications essential to the conduct of public and private affairs. All that was needed was proper education. I kept hoping that the feminist Mary Wollstonecraft would have heard of the ideas of Ludwig Holberg during her visit to Norway and Denmark decades later. She made no mention of him in her own travel account, but her daughter, Mary Shelley, devoured Journey to the World Underground when it came into her hands years later. Holberg's commitment to impartiality is still an important value for historians in the 21st century, though the frame in which we assess evidence, our frames, are wider than his. His frame was that of a tolerant, enlightened European Christian. Interestingly enough, he followed the Jews in his Jewish history to many lands, from Persia to America. But when it came to his textbook on universal history, he strayed no farther from Europe than the Ottoman Empire. Ours is a global frame in which more continents, peoples, ideas, and religions count. African studies now flourish in Norway, where important publications have also come forth on the Danish West India Company and the 18th century slave trade. Today, when we study, say, the history of the book, we can plunge into 18th century North Africa and the Ottoman Empire, where printing in movable type in Arabic had just begun. Instead of wringing our hands about how backward and lacking these people were in the 18th century compared to England, impartial historical practice summons us to explore what they did have. Books printed in Hebrew, available in Jewish neighborhoods from Istanbul to desert oases. Block printed amulets and wall hangings in Arabic and Hebrew, bringing protection to Jewish and Muslim mothers. And a widespread scribal culture, producing accurate Arabic manuscripts at a remarkable rate, which were read or read aloud, at least in circles of men, in remote villages and mountain towns. Within our global frame, I want to suggest a contribution historians can make in our second decade of the 21st century, a contribution of interest, I think, both to scholars and to wider publics. I think we can write new histories that deal with difference, those differences that people believe important in their own time and place, markers of group definition, sources of amity, and sources of violence. Historians have already written about belief systems that claim one or another kind of superiority: Greeks over barbarians, men over women, Europeans and North Africans over sub-Saharan Africans, Han Chinese over other regional ethnicities, and much more. The construction of myths of strong and ancient nationhood has been described as it went on in many lands in the past and is going on today. But to these earlier studies, we can add the history of processes that undermine or limit or qualify such claims to absolute distinction. The boundaries around any one of these groups are often fuzzy and porous, even while the people at its center may be insisting on a sharp difference between us and them. For instance, the borders of Jewishness The identifying marks of Jews in antiquity were not sharp and clear-cut, so recent research is showing us. And even after the rabbis of the second century had proclaimed that being Jewish required a Jewish mother or very strict conversion, Jewish borders were eroded by prohibited intermarriage and non-rabbinical conversions, as with the Berber Jews of North Africa, the Jewish tribes in pre-Islamic Arabia, and the Khazar Jews living between the Black and Caspian Seas. Borders of identity are also crossed by actions less dramatic than religious conversion, and historians like myself and others in this room have increasingly been turning their attention to forms of cultural mixture, métissage, and exchange, whether occasioned by movements of peoples, by trading networks and diasporas, or by the coexistence in the same region of people with different customs and languages. So, a new book by an Indian historian tells us of a young Muslim warrior named Ghazi Mian, martyred during the Turkish conquest of North India in the 11th century, and yet the object of an immensely popular cult to this day of both Hindus and Muslims. How was this possible? Muslim ballads portrayed him as an Islamic holy warrior, but an Islamic holy warrior who had been martyred on his wedding day protecting Hindu herdsmen and their cows against a rapacious Hindu landlord. Though religious differences are surmounted in this story, they have often left a trail of bloodshed through history, as have other strong differences between us and them. Back in 1972, at the 400th anniversary of the massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day, I wrote a paper called The Rights of Violence, R-I-T-E-S, not R-I-G-H-T-S, but R-I-T-E-S, of violence, in which I tried to find some order in the destruction of sacred statues and the humiliation and murder of religious opponents by both Protestant and Catholic street crowds during the Reformation in France. Rather than seeing these people as possessed by some demonic force erupting in inhuman violence, I took an anthropological approach, showing why they believed their behavior was justified and how their actions had some order to them, a violent acting out of rituals of purification. Since then, younger scholars have gone on to refine and expand such an approach to popular violence in France and elsewhere, but have also begun to look at popular practices of tolerance and what I might call rituals of peace. In early modern Europe, these go all the way from delineating the use of public space for religious action so that differing groups will not offend each other, to the circulation of a popular adage in both Europe and the Americas, quote, "The good Jew, the good Christian, the good Muslim, each can be saved in his or her own law." I like to think of historians from many lands indulging in their own practices of peacemaking in the second decade of the 21st century. Not to delineate separate spaces from each other or conceal their views, but rather to work frankly toward forms of common knowledge. One such endeavor has already begun: the collaboration over the last decade among a new generation of Turkish and Armenian historians living in Turkey, North America, and elsewhere, to review and add to the documentary evidence on what all in this mixed group regard as state-sponsored ethnic cleansing of the Armenians in 1915, and many, though not all in the group, characterized as genocide according to the United Nations definition. Their papers will soon be published, replacing, as one of the organizers says, the two opposing nationalist narratives by a single shared account based on evidence and reflecting on their unsettled questions of definition. Ludwig Holberg would surely applaud this contemporary version of impartial history, and it will inspire other historians towards similar ventures. A last contribution that historians of the 21st century can make is an old one, going back to the beginning of our craft, telling of the wonder of the past and all its astonishing range and experience. In my own case, after more than 60 years as a historian, I am still fascinated and moved when I read the journal of a Dutch ship bearing 400 men and women from Africa to the colony of Suriname, and see the captain's skulls and bones drawn in the margins as slaves die, and the punishments he metes out to those who dared to revolt. I want to tell of a man who survived that voyage and lived long enough to see his great-grandson free. I want to tell of the amazing Elizabeth Sampson, a free black woman of Suriname, who in 1764 fought all the way to Amsterdam for the right to marry a white man. I want to tell of her great-grandnephew, who, more concerned than she about the condition of slaves, made dioramas, which we can still see today, showing their plantations and their slave dances. The Ludwig Holberg Memorial Prize is not only a very great honor, but a gift that inspires my deep gratitude. I plan to share its bounty with others and to use my remaining years also to applaud the young generation of historians as they write history that is responsible, critical, and innovative. The splendid scholarship of Johan Ostling, the Nils Klim Prize winner, whom I first met when he was a graduate student, gives strong grounds for such confidence. May the history writings in the future, be they in the tragic mode or the comic mode, reveal the possibilities of the past and give grounds for hope for a fruitful and peaceful world.